Well, the Bombers VFL team was in action today down at Windy Hill against North Melbourne, the spiritual home of the Bombers down there at Windy Hill, the first match they've played down there all year. And the match was significant not just for who was playing, but also for who wasn't playing. Lewis Hayes, the young player who was named emergency last night for the Bombers in the senior team, was an omission from the team today, not because of injury, but because he was managed. And when you combine the fact that he was first emergency for the senior team last night, combine that with the fact that Ridley was injured and will be out for 3 to 4 weeks, and Lewis Hayes plays as a backman and Ridley plays as a backman, you don't need to be a genius to work out that Lewis Hayes is pretty much certain or earmarked to make his debut on Saturday twilight against the Sydney Swans. I think you can pretty much take that one to the bank. I'm 99% certain that's why he was taken out of today's team. And he has been in pretty good form, to be fair to Lewis Hayes. He has been closing in on a senior berth. That's why he was first emergency last night. So we'll wait till the team gets announced for it to be official, of course. But I would suggest that the reason he's out of the team is because he's going to be playing against the Sydney Swans next week. So North Melbourne actually won the game, 12-11-83 to 10-13-73. They led by 13 points at half-time. Essendon did come back a little bit in the third quarter, but North steadied. North had 18 listed AFL players playing, and Essendon only had the 12. So it's actually a pretty good performance by Essendon to get as close as they did. So the game was played in, to be honest, perfect conditions. There wasn't a breath of wind down there, although it was a little bit of a low standard, I think, in the first half. But what we're sort of all interested in is how the senior players are going, the ones who will be pushing for senior selection, given that we've got a few injuries in the senior team now with, a pretty brutal game against the Kangaroos at Marvel last night. Nick Cox was playing forward. He kicked a couple of points in the first quarter from a couple of good marks. It looked pretty natural down there. It's always difficult to compare when you're playing at the lowest standard. Whether they're trialling him there as some sort of stopgap or whether he's actually earmarked there as a potential forward in the seniors, I'm not really sure. I think something like the wing is probably more likely for him. But he was playing, in the forward line, in the forward 50 today. Archer Day Wicks, who has also been pushing for senior selection, looked to be playing in the back line. We've been used to him playing in the forward line. He had picked up 11 possessions at half-time, which was the equal most for us, or one less actually than Zach Johnson. Zach Johnson had 12 possessions at half-time. Angus Clark had the 11. Angus Clark's returning from the collarbone injury. So Clark, Archer Day Wicks, Zach Johnson, Cox, they all look pretty good. Guelfi took a mark and kicked a goal as well. So we had a pretty even contribution from most of our senior players, even though we were 15 points down at half-time. Sardo Hooley had the nine possessions to half-time. Vigo Vicentini was continuing to play in the ruck, obviously, at the 22 hit-outs. Vigo Vicentini continuing to play in the ruck, obviously, we'll keep an eye on him. The way Goldstein was going last night, Goldstein had a pretty good game, but, it's going to be very, very hard on him just to continually play, 80 to 90% of game time every week as the lone ruckman, depending on what we do with Peter Wright down there. So we're going to be watching Vigo pretty closely, and I don't think he's that close yet, but he's certainly looking better and better. So how did our senior listed players go? That's pretty much what everybody wants to know. No one is usually too concerned about the result of these games. You want to know how the players are going who could be pushing for senior selection. Zach Johnson, of course, who everyone seems to be a big fan of, had 25 possessions, 2 tackles and a clearance. Probably not as dominant as he was last week, but he still played pretty well. Angus Clark, who really looks like he could be a senior player. Nuggety little player. 19 disposals, 6 marks. He looked to be one of our better players. Archer Day Wicks, who was a little quieter after half-time. He had the 11 possessions up to half-time and had 18 for the game, as well as 5 tackles. It looked like he was playing mainly out of the back line. At least that's what I could gather from watching the stream. Normally he's sort of been playing that sort of forward role, a bit like maybe an Archie Perkins type role. But, picked up 18 possessions, and after a pretty average game a couple of games ago, he's still going to be pushing for senior selection. Will he get into the senior team? Well, I'm not so sure. I think there's a couple ahead of him at the moment. Certainly, Lewis Hayes is going to be ahead of him, but I don't think he did himself any harm with this game. Saad El Houli, 16 possessions, didn't hit the scoreboard this week. He does like to kick a goal, and he contributed without being absolutely spectacular. Vigo Vicentini, 45 hitouts. He was a bit of a monster down there. 15 possessions, and look, he's just looking at him. I'm just going by the eye test here. When you're just looking at the output of the player based on what you can see, he's starting to look like a player. His body's starting to fill out. He looks bigger than what I thought he would be, given he's so young. And I wouldn't have normally thought that he would be making a debut this year, just given the, where he is in the pecking order. But now with the injury ruck stocks depleted, there's every chance he could be making a debut, but I wouldn't think it'd be soon. I think it would be later in the year. What's interesting is that they play him before the mid-season draft? The mid-season draft is on the 28th. I would suggest it's almost certain we'll be taking a ruckman in that pre-season draft. Mid-season draft, not pre-season draft. I'd suggest it's almost certain we'll be taking a ruckman. So will they play him before that? Depending on who they pick and who they've got in mind. Luamon Luau had 13 possessions, kicked a nice little goal in the last quarter. He is very quick, and that's probably his strength, his anticipation and his speed. He looked pretty good without being spectacular. Same with Jaden Nguyen, who had the 14 possessions. Mount Guelfi, first game back, he had 12 possessions and a goal. I think they'll probably give him another game in the twos, maybe even another couple of games. It was a pretty brutal hamstring injury that he had, and he just needs to get the feel for the game back. That was not just a 4-week injury, that was really a 10-week injury. But it was good to see him back getting a run. Reece Unwin had the 11 possessions, and I noticed him a little bit, but didn't contribute a whole lot. Nick Cox was the interesting one, who looked to be playing in the forward line. He had the 10 disposals, didn't kick a goal, and look, it'll be hard for him to break into the senior team, obviously, even though those chances are probably now a bit more, given that we've had our stocks depleted with a few injuries in the senior game against the Kangaroos. But just finding a spot for him and knowing where to play him. They were playing him forward today. There's not a spot in the forward line for him in the senior team. That's for sure. So, look, it'll be interesting to see where his future lies, and also where presuming he plays in the VFL again next week, where they play him. Are they going to trial him in different positions? I don't know, but he had the 10 possessions and kicked a couple of behinds. Alwyn Davey didn't hit the scoreboard, had just the 8 touches. Cale Girine, he had one of his better games last week. Only had the 6 touches, of course, but he kicked 3 goals, which is a great return for him. And he's starting to actually hit the scoreboard on a more regular basis. So he won't be playing this year, but he's starting to develop into a player, and this was one of the better games I've seen him play. So that is the VFL game that was played today at 2 o'clock down at Windy Hill. The Bombers got done by 11 points. Interesting to see how Guelfi and Cox go in terms of their prospects for senior football. Will Zach Johnson get a game soon? Everybody's wondering that. We know Lewis Hayes is almost certain. What do you guys think? Do you have any views on the game? Do you have any views on who out of this match should be playing in the seniors? I'd love to hear it. Let me know in the comments. Subscribe to this channel. Have a great day, everybody. And as always, go Bombers. Striving for glory.